Good morning and welcome to The Skinny for Friday, June 27th. I'm Mitch Perry, the senior political reporter for the Florida Phoenix, joined as I am every Friday with Ray Roa, the editor-in-chief of Creative Loafing newspaper. Good morning, Ray.
Good morning, Mitch. How's it going?
Good. Great to be here. Getting closer to the 4th of July.
We are. And a programming note, we're going to pre-record a show for the 4th of July.
Yeah, it's going to be like 60 minutes. They do it. They don't do a whole rerun, but they run different segments during the summertime. We're going to do something like that. So we'll talk about that at the very end of the show. So we hope you're around if you're around next week. But anyway, today's show, we're going to be talking a lot about Florida policy and politics with former GOP State Senator Jeff Brandes, who's in the studio with us for the entire hour. And we look forward to talking to Jeff, of course, is the Florida Policy Project, a think tank that's been looking at some of the biggest issues affecting Florida here. So we'll get to him in just a minute, but we're going to talk at the beginning of the show here on a couple of environmental issues that are definitely in the news. One, it's a kind of a happy note for environmentalists, but first we're going to talk about, of course, one of the biggest stories here in Florida that's evolved in the last week or so, which is this whole issue of an immigration facility, detention facility being built as we speak in the Everglades. In fact, I saw Governor DeSantis this morning. He was on Fox and Friends with host Steve Ducey, and they were literally walking on the footprint of that facility. The governor says they'll actually be able to begin taking in detainees by as early as next week. And there are definitely folks who are not happy with this, including environmentalists who say this is a big problem. This is right in the middle of the Everglades. And joining us right now on Zoom for a couple of minutes to discuss this is Marcelo Balladares, the Everglades organizing representative with the Sierra Club's Florida chapter. Good morning, Marcelo.
Good morning, Mitch. Happy to be here.
Thank you so much for joining us. So let's get to it. Obviously, the organization Sierra Club has come out very much against this. Just tell us why you're against this.
Sure. I mean, beyond the obvious environmental disaster that this would be, it's also a very inhumane proposal and very irresponsible on environmental, ethical, and fiscal standpoints.
Okay, so let's get into that. And I know you, and certainly on the environmental issue, this is the Everglades, of course. So much has been gone in there. And this state, and DeSantis has talked about this, what he's done there to restore the Everglades. We've also heard from Friends of the Everglades. There was a protest there last Sunday about this. People really concerned. Now, Governor DeSantis was in town a couple times this week, and I saw him on Wednesday at USF Health in downtown Tampa. And I brought this up. I said there are concerns from groups like the Sierra Club on the environmental front. And Marcelo, he just dismissed those concerns. He said that the criticism comes from people who just don't like the idea about the state building a facility that is holding undocumented migrants. So what do you say when you hear that?
Yeah, I think you'll find that that's just not true. There's a lot of people that have come out on this solely on the environmental impacts that it's going to have. And it's something that we're seeing more and more of as they continue their pretty much a government takeover of the facility and just steamrolling over the usual processes and environmental impact statements that would normally go on with something like this happening. A lot of people are extremely concerned for the effects it's going to have on the Everglades and especially Everglades restoration efforts that have gone on for decades now.
Yeah, you said, I think the mayor of Miami also mentioned that when she contacted the attorney general or the state, I think that's who she reached out to last week, because of course this was land owned by Miami-Dade County. Apparently the state offered $20 million. The Miami Miami-Dade mayor came back with $190 million. Then the state just took it outright. Although I asked DeSantis about this the other day, and he says they're still maybe negotiating. I don't know if that's the case. But it's specifically about, okay, so let's talk about the Everglades, right? There's been so much that has been done to restore it there. Now, I don't know if the governor said this, but others have said, like, this is where this area is at, that little jetport area. It's 39 square miles. That nothing much is going on there right now. That's where this activity is going to happen. It's going to be kind of light construction, as it were. So they say, they're not really going to affect so much of what happens there. What do you say to that?
I think that's very just a lie. Regardless of what they do, what they're already doing is having effects there. Placing a significant facility with thousands of people being held and processed is going to have a significant impact on the traffic in the area, as well as the habitats, the surrounding habitats. It's, in Big Cypress as well, which is one of our dark sky designated areas in the United States. So, having that the lights that they're going to need is going to disturb those habitats that nocturnal creatures depend on, as well as, folks who come out there for ecotourism, for example. They're not going to be able to get that view that they came there looking for.
Right, right. Again, we're speaking with Marcello Balladares. He's the Everglades organizing representative with the Sierra Club's Florida chapter, talking about what there has been dubbed as the what is it? The
alligator Alcatraz.
Yes. I don't even like using that, but it's kind of when you write about it, it's like the shorthand.
The alliteration is nice.
Well, marketing is everything here. So before we let you go, Marcello, could we possibly see litigation happen here? It seems like this thing is a go.
That's what I was going to ask you, Marcello. Yeah. This thing seems like almost a done deal here, and people are already lined up on the side of the street. I think there'll be a lot of action there this weekend. We haven't even talked about the indigenous issues at play here. What is the next steps for people who oppose this? Because it seems like this thing's going up.
Yeah, right now we are exploring litigation options. I did see that there's additional protests and demonstrations being planned out. I think folks are also looking to their state legislators and representatives, similar to the sort of reaction that we had with the state parks issue last year, where they were at risk of development, and everybody across the aisle came out and said this is not something we want. And I think there's a lot of opportunity for that to happen again here, because it is our Everglades. It's something that all Floridians will feel, especially in southern and central Florida, at one point or another.
Last question for you. I know when I asked this to DeSantis the other day, he said, hey, I've done so much for the Everglades. And he, I guess, has spent over $6.5 billion in his 6 years in office. And the current budget, if it stays as is, we're going to find out in the next couple days, I believe it has the most money ever allocated, over $800 billion. How would you evaluate DeSantis' efforts on the Everglades and Everglades restoration?
I think significant efforts have definitely been made and invested throughout the DeSantis administration, which is why something like this seems so, the exact opposite of what we would be expecting, and puts that exact effort and investment at risk.
Indeed. Okay, we'll leave it there. Marcello Balladares with the Everglades organizing representative for the Sierra Club. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, we're going to move on to another environmental issue, and this is a feel-good issue, Ray, actually, as it were. And this is last night, Governor DeSantis signed, I believe, 5 bills. He announced a press release about 8 o'clock last night, and one of them was HB 1143, which was passed unanimously in the legislature, that bans oil drilling near the Apalachicola River Basin in North Florida. And joining us to talk about that is Adrienne Johnson. She's the executive director of the Florida Shellfish Aquaculture Association. Good morning, Adrienne.
Good morning. It's good to be here.
Yeah, it must be feeling good this morning after learning last night that DeSantis did sign this bill.
We are feeling very good. And I think, as you said earlier, just, we need some good news right now. And I think I was excited to come on the show this morning to be able to celebrate that good news. We've been waiting really since the bill landed on the governor's desk about a week or so ago. And this has been hard fought. And so it's certainly cause for celebration, and at a time, I think, when Apalachicola in particular really needs a win.
Yes, I heard a lot about that when that bill was being discussed in the legislature earlier this year. Now, your organization, the Florida Shellfish Aquaculture Association, you represent over 350 shellfish farmers across the state of Florida. And so why was this, I think it's obvious on a certain level, obviously, why you wouldn't want oil drilling, but this was such a big issue for the folks in that community. Tell us why.
It really was. And I think I know that oftentimes, in environment and progress get pitted against one another. And I think for our community in particular, the idea that, our shellfish farmers depend on clean water for their livelihood. And our industry is a new and emerging industry in the state of Florida. Our folks are, as far as our oyster farmers, most of them are operating across Wakulla, Franklin, and Gulf counties. Those are the counties that really are most impacted by this piece of legislation, and would have been most detrimental to those farms. And so I think that when you look at an industry like ours, where it's protecting the environment is protecting the working watermen and women, it's protecting jobs and really a way of life. And so I think that when we think of this bill, it's not just an environmental issue. It's a values issue. It's really a Florida first bill. So we're pleased about that, and I think for our farmers, just it is a nod to the important work that they do out on the water every day.
Now, Adrian, some people were questioning why this wasn't covered under we had a constitutional amendment in 2018.
Amendment 9, I think.
Is that because it was right off of the Gulf Shores? I mean, what was the
Well, this is on land, and I guess
yeah.
I'll admit that I'm not as familiar with the ins and outs of that, but I do know this is a private out-of-state oil company. They had permits in the Apalachicola River Basin, there were not existing protections, and so I think that that's certainly what we wanted to accomplish with this bill. And when we set out, it was really a single site that was the start of all of this, but there were 5 additional places that could have been drilled, and so the importance of this bill is that it provides permanent protections that. None of those sites can be developed in that area. So it's huge.
Yes. Again, we're speaking with Adrienne Johnson. She's the executive director of the Florida Shellfish Aquaculture Association. Now, the governor, he was in Clearwater Beach on Monday, and I did ask him, I was the reporter who asked him about this bill, if he would sign it. And, I'm sure you heard his comments. He was all equivocal. It was kind of interesting. And he talked about how the Florida Department of Environmental Protection this month had said it would abide by an administrative judge's recommendation and deny that company, Clearwater Land and Minerals, a permit to drill a well along the banks of the river. This is, I know, again, the folks in your community were really concerned about that, right? When that happened a while ago, right? When that initially they were making their move in that area to do this.
That's correct. And I'm glad you asked the question. And I think that the governor's comments really pointed to, again, that, the necessity of the bill, because DEP didn't act correctly until litigation was brought. They issued a permit and then had to, respond to a judge's order that basically said, no, you violated your own rules in doing this. And so I think as the governor commented that this company had been getting permits. Time after time. And so the HB 1143 really states very clearly and provides that direction for if this is a problem in the future, that DEP has that guidance, and there's no question about it in terms of what is protected and how they go about their permit issuing.
Adrian, you mentioned a moment ago that this was really important, that it's been a tough time in the area up there. I guess people call it the Forgotten Coast. Tell us why it's been tough up there of late.
Yeah, well, I think that this stems back. The Gulf oil spill impacted the area immensely. That was back in 2010, and I think that the scars of that we still see along the coast. That oil didn't reach the shores, but it devastated the local economy and collapsed the oyster industry. And people are still trying to rebuild from that and have made great strides, including investments by the state under the governor's leadership to help restore Apalachicola Bay. And so I think that this was, the idea of oil drilling upriver was deeply personal. And so this really was a community effort to come together and say, this is critical, not just to, our rural coastal communities, but the economy and a way of life. And now we're seeing, the importance of water quality that, due to some aging infrastructure and right now they're in a water crisis. And so it is a big problem. And I think that this, as I said, was a win that Apalachicola needed right now. And so I think it was really important timing for the governor to show up for them and sign the bill. And he's done that. And I think that, it's a little bit of wind in our sails at a time when they are facing a pretty dire water issue.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're very happy for your community there. This is Adrienne Johnson. She's the executive director of the Florida Shellfish Aquaculture Association. Adrienne, thank you so much for joining us here this morning on The Skinny.
Thanks for having me. Take care.
All right. Thank you so much. And now we're going to reset here. Again, if you're just tuning in right now, you're listening to Skinny here from the WMNF studios. Mitch Perry with Ray Rowe. And we're joined by former State Senator Jeff Brandes from the St. Petersburg area. Good morning, Jeff.
Good morning. Great to be with you.
Yeah, great to have you with us in studio and a lot to talk about. So where do you want to begin? Let's see here. But I know you're. We should tell you with the Florida Policy Project now, because you're a guy who, when you left the legislature a couple years ago, 3 years ago, I guess now, this coming up in the fall.
Feels like an eternity.
I know, yeah.
Yeah, but you care so much. You care so much about these issues.
I'm just an addict looking, and this is how I kind of get my my fix here, is by continuing to work on public policy. But I would consider myself a public policy addict who just loves solving tough problems at scale and thinks that Florida doesn't address some of the major issues that we have.
So let's talk about what some people say is still our biggest issue: property insurance. Did the legislature do much of anything this past session?
Not this past session, but the reforms of 2023 have had incredible results. We've had 13 new companies come in. We're seeing rates are really under pressure right now, and I think they're going to begin to come down. I think we've seen the high watermark of rates in Florida, and so I think that's very, very positive. I think you're seeing new companies enter the market. Citizens Property Insurance went from 1.4 million policies just yesterday, announced that they're now under 800,000 policies. That's incredibly positive. So I think you're seeing a lot beyond green shoots. You're seeing real growth begin to happen in Florida, and Florida is becoming a much more competitive property insurance market.
And we've seen, and this is an issue that is really a national issue, right? California, I think, is right next to what we were a couple of years ago with the fires there and the other issues.
Yeah, I mean, listen, the difference between Florida and California was California is a, act of God kind of fires issue. Florida was a man-made crisis. Florida's crisis was its litigation. Listen, insurance companies can price for hurricanes, but they can't price for lawsuits. And when you're 8% of U.S. property claims, but 80% of the national litigation, you can't be the most hurricane-prone state and the most litigious state by orders of magnitude and expect low property rates in the state.
Now, I know the Democrats contest that. That is a fact. I know that because the statistics are the statistics there in terms of the litigation. Maybe it's the lawyer, a lawyer industry that thinks there's been too much emphasis put on them, or that's been the basis for all the problems.
The radical thing that Florida did in 2023 was join 49 other states with how it deals with litigation and says everybody pays their own attorney's fees. That was, I don't understand why this is so controversial or radical. There are now 50 states instead of 49 and 1 that changed that had the rule. But we had insurance companies that were getting sued more than the entire state of California. We had one insurance company getting sued more than the entire state of California was suing all of its insurance companies at one point. So that's just unsustainable. And so Florida has turned the tide. It's going to take continued time, but you are seeing companies enter the market. You're seeing new capital come in. This is what Florida needed to happen. And if you just want to look at one number, look at where Citizens numbers are. That tells you what the health of Florida is. Citizens, by the end of the year, will likely be about 650 to 700,000 policies. And their low watermark, without them kind of restructuring Citizens, is probably in that 500,000 range.
We're talking again to former Republican State Senator Jeff Brandes from St. Petersburg. Jeff, the governor's going to sign the budget probably on Monday, I believe it is. Obviously, he's got to. July 1st is Tuesday, and that's the new fiscal year. And this has been really intense for him because I was reading about this. I think Gary Fineout wrote about this morning because he's literally only had a couple of weeks to go through this entirely large budget where he usually has over a month or so. But because the legislature, as we all know, didn't finish up until recently, he has hinted the budget is roughly $115 billion. That's roughly, I believe, $500 million more than what his proposed budget was earlier this year. And I think he's going to do $500 million worth of vetoes, as he hinted at that. This includes a $1.3 billion tax cut, as I think listeners know who've been following this. That was the big schism, as it were, right, between the House and Senate, how big their tax cut was going to be. It's not, the biggest part of this is a $900 annual sales tax on business rent. Mm-hmm. Do you support that?
100%.
Yeah. Why is that?
Because we're one of the only few states in the country that charges a business rent tax.
Yeah. So we had at one point, House Speaker Perez had a radical idea of reducing our sales tax, which is a flat 6%. It's higher in certain counties like in Hillsborough and Pinellas, to 5.25%. That would be across the board. some would argue that is fairer than it would be, say, on, we're not talking about property tax, we'll talk about that in a minute, but nevertheless, that was, across the board. Now, Governor DeSantis came back and said, I don't want to be giving a tax cut for tourists because this would be, people who coming from Canada would be enjoying the same tax break as Floridians. But, Jeff Brandes, there is also projections that we'll be in deficits in the next couple of years. So was it irresponsible to be talking about these huge tax cuts?
Think about who stopped this, right? It wasn't the current president and current speaker. It was the next speaker and the next Senate president who are like, listen, I've got to eat this cooking. And so I have to have resources to run this state going forward. And if you do these radical things now, then I'm going to be having you talk about potentially tax increases down the road.
So wait a minute.
I don't want to do that.
So you're talking about, is it Sam Garrison is in the House?
Garrison and Boyd.
Okay, and Jim Boyd.
They're the ones who stood up and stopped this thing. They were like, listen, we're not going to do this because we have to have flexibility going forward.
Now, they put a lot of money in what they call, this, not to get too nerdy about it, but the Budget Stabilization Fund, which is our reserves, right?
Yeah, but it can be tapped at any time.
Right. And I know some Dems would criticize the fact that they're saying we're putting too much money. I mean, we're very solid financially. I think that's across the board, everybody would agree with that. We've had great revenues coming in, although that's stopping now with the federal money is no longer coming in. But nevertheless, that, we do have issues to deal with right now that maybe we could be spending some money on those versus saving it for a large rainy day.
Well, look, I think you definitely want a rainy day fund. I think any financial responsible budget has that. I think what we've got to focus on is moving forward and making sure that we have the resources to run this state. There are tons of deferred maintenance issues that we can talk about in the state of Florida that we need to make investments in.
And let's talk about that in a minute here. And again, if you're just tuning in, we're 27 minutes past the hour here on WMNF or from the WMNF studios. Mitch Perry with Ray Rowe talking to former state legislator Jeff Brandes, and love to get your thoughts on this conversation here. The phone number to call in is 813-239-9663. You can also send us an email at dj@wmnf.org. Now, another issue which I think we would agree on is still hasn't gone away in terms of being a problem here is on housing. And I know this is another one. This is certainly one of the Florida Policy Project's pet issues. In fact, you had your big housing discussion last month. Where are we on that? And also, okay, I guess let's ask that first because I don't want to talk about Live Local Act because, there's so many issues going on with that. But anyway, how would you say overall? And by the way, I think the guys before us were talking about housing because, Hillsborough County just recently got rid of, they had this $10 million fund that they just got rid of for affordable housing. Is this problem over now? I didn't understand that. But anyway, overall in the state, where do you think how we're doing here?
So listen, my big takeaway after 12 years in Tallahassee is there is no strategy. It's all tactical in Tallahassee, right? I would say it kind of Tallahassee and Florida, frankly, is stuck in the 70s when it comes to housing. You think about the SHIP and the SAIL program that kind of talked about things. Those were designed in the early 70s, and we haven't touched them since. Nobody's gone back and really reformed them. Nobody's really asking if there's working. And I can tell you in the legislature, there really isn't a standout housing champion who has taken this issue solely on as saying, this is the issue that I'm going to own for the next 8 to 10 years.
And we need one, basically.
We need a state. We need a state run on best practices. This is what the Florida Policy Project has been talking about for 3 years now, which is look, let's go back and spend the resources to actually go through our housing plan and put forth best practices from around the country that actually work. I don't know how that's controversial.
There was a bill on ADUs this year. I think Gates, Matt Gates' dad, Daddy Gates, Don Gates,
Papa Gates.
Yeah. And so I think that folded at the end though, right? That didn't happen.
Yeah, I got caught up in the whole Airbnb vacation rental kind of the discussion. Unfortunately, listen. Accessory dwelling units, mother-in-law suites, granny flats, whatever you want to call them, that is the shortest putted housing. They should be allowed by right in every property in the state of Florida. And that would radically allow for us to increase at least a certain amount of single family, single bedroom kind of housing, which is what we desperately need. Servers and police officers and other people need places to stay, and single people need places to stay, and that would allow for that. And we could do that without government financing all of these projects. The simple truth is, if you want to build a brand new apartment in St. Petersburg right now, it's going to cost you, even affordable apartments are going to cost you $300,000, $330,000 a unit to build that in St. Petersburg. There's no way to make that affordable without massive government subsidies. So what are the ways that we can have housing become more affordable without massive government subsidies? This is what the Florida Policy Project has laid out. you've got to do accessory dwelling units. You've got to allow lot splits by right. You've got to allow for smaller lot sizes, and you've got to allow increased density. Instead of building a single family home, allow a duplex, allow a quad. I can make those structures look exactly like a single family home. You wouldn't know 3 families lived in there, but you can do that today. So we've got to get creative. The problem is the incentives are wrong. The state largely gave zoning and control of housing to the cities and counties decades ago, in like the 20s and 30s. And we haven't gone back and said, all right, now we're going to give you the incentives for doing the right thing. But if you continue to do the wrong thing and continue to kind of go down this path of single family homes on quarter acre lots, and that's all you can build, well, then we're going to run out of land, as we have in Pinellas, and as you are seeing in Hillsborough, where basically people have to get in a car and drive until they can qualify for a mortgage. Why is growth exploding in Polk County? Well, it's because that's how far you have to go to get a $250,000 home.
Right. And that's what we saw the expansion in eastern Hillsborough County over the last decade or so.
We're pushing people out, but people don't want to live. They want to live closer to downtown. Mm-hmm. There's just nothing they can afford downtown. And it's because our product mix is wrong. And we have to have the courage of our local elected officials. But frankly, you need the incentives that Tallahassee sets to get the local officials to give them the courage to do what they need to do.
Yeah, it seems like locally, when we talk about ADUs or even, the way homes look at the local level, we run into things, whether it's an architecture commission or something like that. This house isn't going to look the right way. Or with ADUs, is it just going to be an Airbnb? How can we guarantee that the ADU is going to be used for more permanent housing?
You can't and you shouldn't. The simple truth is a bunch of these ADUs are going to be somebody's garage band, and some of them are going to be vacation rentals, and some of them are going to be for family members that want to transition out of their existing homes. Stop focusing on all the specific uses and focus on the fact that you need more housing units, period.
Right.
Just at the end of the day, more housing units, period. And so what can we do to get more housing units, period, online?
Now, speaking about Airbnbs, there has been, I know Tampa Bay Times has done a lot of journalism on this about these big companies, or whether equity companies or what have you, buying properties, and that's all they're using it for. Do you think that's out of hand? Do you think?
No, it's not. It's not, because
you're a free market guy.
Well, the evidence shows that for a vast majority of these companies, they're renting to long-term renters. Well, that's great. Those renters needed someplace to go, and a lot of them are keeping their houses up. The ones that aren't keeping their houses up, look, people shouldn't rent those houses. But the simple truth is that if you don't want the government to start playing in that sandbox, a lot of individuals build their wealth by buying homes and renting them out. Right. We're not going to put a cap on the amount of homes that one entity or one person can buy. And if you did, these companies would just create new entities under the existing holding company, and they would buy 100 homes, and then they would move on and create another entity and buy another 100 homes. There's no way around that. And the simple truth is the government shouldn't be forcing or mandating it. What needs to happen is the government has to change the rules to allow more housing units to be built. Right. And they haven't done that.
Yeah.
Senator, as Mitch pulls up this question here, I want to ask you a question on homeowners insurance. Obviously, you mentioned the new companies coming in, Citizens are shrinking.
Right.
But is there anything that policymakers can do to help owners who are having to hire like private insurance adjusters to help them get payments, like after this hurricane? Right, your insurance company says, we're only going to give you this, but then you feel like you're entitled to more. Is that a problem in the insurance industry? Is there anything that we can do from a policy standpoint?
There's a lot of things they can do. They can go to appraisal, whereas they can get their own appraisal on that claim, and the insurance can do their own appraisal on that claim, and then they go to an umpire who makes the determination. They can go to mediation. There is all kinds of alternative dispute resolution systems built in. They can contact the Department of Consumer Services. They can contact DF Department of Financial Services. There's all these things built in. I think the state of Florida has done a poor job explaining to people what all the alternatives are. Yeah. But insurance companies overwhelmingly want to get these claims paid and resolved, and they want to move on, because a litigated claim in Florida costs 4 times what a non-litigated claim costs for an insurance company. So they want to be able to take care of their policyholders, and they want to move forward. But there are always going to be certain cases that end up in disputes, and we should be looking to address those disputes non-judicially where we can, but obviously judicial route should be an option for those where there's some egregiousness or some clearly outside the bounds.
Again, if you're just tuning in, you're listening to Skinny here from the WMNF studios. We're speaking with a former state senator, Jeff Brandes from St. Petersburg, and we're going to go to David, who was calling in. I think he wants to talk about insurance. Good morning, David.
Yes, hi. Thank you for this topic today. I was just curious. I think the state needs to do a little bit better job of getting the bad actors out of the insurance industry, and I'm thinking specifically about Slide Insurance. And, they're a takeout company that was charging, I think, up to 800% more than what Citizens was doing for Citizens Takeout. And, it turned out just recently that the Slide CEO was making just an exorbitant amount of money, like millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars, comparable to like some of the national insurance companies. So just curious what Mr. Brandis thinks about that.
Okay. Thank you, David. Any thoughts?
Look, I think there's actually a new rule that Citizens has created because of some of the activities of Slide. So if in Florida, you used to be able to make people an offer of for Citizens policies anywhere, at any number, and if people chose that, they would go with you. In Florida now, what Citizens has said is you can't make an offer above 140% above what Citizens rates are. Citizens rates are about, even based on Citizens' own data, between 30 and 40% inadequate in the Tampa Bay market and Miami-Dade market.
No,
so Citizens has the Office of Insurance Regulation and Citizens have kind of changed some of the rules because of some of the activity they've seen.
Do you remember now going back to the beginning of the session? I was trying to look this up. That the Tampa Bay Times had the story about going back in 17, 18, 19, where the insurance industry, they said they couldn't afford these things, and then we saw they were paying these other companies all this money. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, I'm being a little scattered here because I'm just
they're MG. They were playing at their MGAs and their
and we had a hearing on that, maybe a couple hearings on that, and then it kind of just faded away. Then all of a sudden, Florida happened.
The challenge you have in Florida right now is this. If you went to Tallahassee and you met with 160 legislators, maybe 2 or 3 could have a property insurance conversation at a level that you and I could have it at, because we've been around and involved in this for a while. Most of them are an inch deep and a mile wide on this topic. Yeah. They don't understand, how does Citizens work? How does the CAT fund work? What does FIGA do? What is the role of these private insurers? How does adjusting firms work? They just have no context, and they haven't marinated in this for years. This is the challenge of term limits in Florida and being so short, where you have House members that were, they've been in for 4 years. Listen, they were a nurse, they were a doctor, they were something else before this, but they weren't an insurance expert. And for the most part, you have just very little expertise in Florida in the property insurance
Would you
space.
have liked to continue to serve? You were term limited 3 years ago.
Look, I love what I'm doing, and I love what I was doing in the Florida legislature. I would love to have continued to be involved and engaged. And I think, look, when I left after 12 years of service, I take that knowledge with me. Most legislators, they go off and retire or do something else. Like, I started a policy group just to work on these hard problems. Here's the thing. My feeling is Florida should base all of its decisions on best practices. Here's what works the best in the country, and we should do this. We should have the best Office of Insurance Regulation in the country. We are one of the most dynamic regions in the world for insurance. And so we should be actively engaging in trying to attract the best talent and attract the best companies to do and write business here. And we should be a leader in the country in best practices.
Staying on housing, I did mention a moment ago the Live Local Act from 2023, which continues to be adjusted because there's been so many issues with it. This is the signature bill from former Senate President Kathleen Passidomo a couple years ago that was to address our housing crisis at the time, and it was looked at for workforce housing, which is considered different than affordable housing because it's a little higher income where people can afford, be allowed to afford these homes. And you mentioned these are for professionals, right? These are for police, doctor, people in the healthcare industry, what have you. People who are not rich but certainly aren't poor either, but yet are being squeezed out because of the escalating property values and what have you in the state. And again, there was reforms done at Tallahassee level. I know I've covered what Pasco County has gone through a whole lot of different problems with this law. Where do you come down on it? Where we're at with the Vocal Act at this point?
It was a 7% solution.
In terms of it
doesn't solve the problem at scale. There is not enough. This is not a problem that you're going to solve with money, especially when it costs you $300,000 a unit to build.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, the city of Tampa, for a few days there, they were talking about removing, or the county was talking about the $10 million that they were putting out. Well, that's not that many units.
No, I know.
Right?
But it's nothing.
It's nothing. It's, but when you think about it, like, listen, you're not going to solve it with $10 million. It isn't going to solve affordable housing. The mayor of Tampa, we're going to build 10,000 units. Well, 10,000 units times $300,000 is a big number that, the city of Tampa doesn't have, especially when it's probably only putting $50, $100 million in total towards housing every year. They have to come up with policy. They need to focus on the policy. But this is the challenge. The policy is the hard part. The policy requires meetings and discussions and debate, and frankly, you're going to upset some people, and it requires political courage to do.
Okay, so you just had this
money
conference.
is the easy part.
You just had this conference. I know you had some folks from around the state, maybe outside the state, talking about these best practices that you talk about. So where is it going right in this country in terms of housing? Where, do you know?
I think different states have have gotten things correct, different pieces correct, right? But the bottom line is we know what works, right? We know, like, there are states that have aggressive accessory dwelling unit policies. California, frankly, has turned the tide in a lot of these areas, and has addressed some of these things like accessory dwelling units. Other states have addressed the specific issue of upzoning. A lot of states are moving towards smaller lot sizes because they see the challenges of a single family home on a quarter-acre lot and limiting that. So we have different states. The great thing about Florida is we have the opportunity to put it all together, roll out a comprehensive package, and create carrots and sticks for counties and cities to participate in them. Listen, cities, counties, if you don't do any of the things that we're asking you to do, then you know what? You shouldn't get affordable housing dollars from the state. But if we wanted to just do the shortest putt is increase the amount of vouchers that we have available and work with our apartment complexes and other and homeowners to make to incentivize them to take those vouchers. Mm-hmm. If you just read, there was a story out of Miami-Dade today, which basically says they have no more Section 8 vouchers, and they have 5,000 people on the waiting list, and $0 for additional Section 8 housing. What are those people going to do? They're going to sleep in their cars? They're going to live on the streets? We have,
it's illegal to sleep in your car now.
Right. Well, the voucher, you can't sleep in a public park or in a public space, right? So ultimately, we have to figure out what is our strategy for the state. And I will argue day in and day out that Florida has no housing strategy.
Right.
And it's one of my biggest complaints about this administration is they have put together they've really not invested in the research necessary to build out a housing strategy. And I don't think they're going to do it next year either, right? Next year's DeSantis' last year. He's on his way out the door. I don't expect major policy to come out next year.
Right.
Next year is a cleanup year. That's what you should expect. This year there was nothing major that came out of Tallahassee, right? And for the insiders, like, we didn't expect much this year. We got less than I think we expected.
Again, if you're just tuning in, we're 43 minutes past the hour here. Mitch Perry with Ray Rowe. We're speaking with former state legislator Jeff Brandes, from St. Petersburg. And Jeff, before we go into policy, I'm going to go to politics for a minute. You used to be a roommate of Jason Pizzo, the state senator from South Florida.
He's my best friend.
Yeah, okay, best friend. Wow, great. So, and we're trying to get him on the show, by the way, so give us a good word next time you talk to him.
I will.
And so Senator Pizzo, as we all know, is called the Democratic Party dead a couple months ago, dramatically left the party. Now is running as a independent NPA. This is going to be tough. Well, let me ask you this, by the way. You are good friends. Would you be his running mate if he asked you?
Jason's my best friend, and I think he wants me as a friend, not a running mate.
Okay, all right. But, okay, so what he's doing, obviously, is seemingly the impossible, which is to win as an independent in the state. But tell me why you think he's I'm sure you think he's a great candidate.
Jason's one of the most dynamic people that I know in the state of Florida. He deeply cares about this state. He is incredibly intelligent. He thinks about the problems differently. And some of my best days in Tallahassee were at the end of the evening, sitting on the front porch and just talking public policy with Senator Pizzo. And so we became great friends, and one of my closest relationships.
Right. How do you? This is going to be very tough, though, for him, obviously, as it would be for a Democrat if he continued to be a Democrat. We have David Jolly. What do you think about David Jolly? You're friends with him, right? I mean,
David is the classic Charlie Crist story, right? Hey, we're going to go from Republican to Independent to Democrat. That didn't play out well for Charlie. I don't think it's going to play out well for David.
Oh, okay. Is that all you're going to say about it? Right now, it is interesting because I think that as a former Republican that he has to try to prove to other Democrats that he's,
Well, I think the Democratic Party has to figure out where it's at. Mm-hmm. Is it in the David Jolly camp of kind of a centrist, try to appease a lot of different groups, or is it, a New York governor candidate who is basically a socialist?
Yeah,
and I think,
mayor, you mean?
Right,
Yeah.
the mayor. Sorry, the mayor. Right,
Yeah.
and I think this is where you have this debate going on, which is he won because he went to the left of the party.
Right. We've got 30 years plus of basically GOP control. Is that good for the Republican Party, though, in terms of like ideas you talk about? I mean, when you don't really have competition anymore?
The challenge in Florida is it's structural, right? We change out our seat leadership in the House and Senate every 24 months. What other major organization changes out its senior leadership every 24 months that has an economy in the size, the scale of Florida? No, that's the reason we have all of this short-term thinking. That's the reason why everything is tactical and not strategy, right? If you're going to do one thing that changed Florida, that would radically change the state and improve it. I'm all for term limits. I'm a product of term limits. Like I support term limits, but 8 years is too short.
Okay.
Go to 12 years.
Yeah, right.
And get away from this high school, hey, you're a junior, you're a senior, you're a freshman kind of mentality that happens in Tallahassee. Right.
Because what does happen, let's talk about this, because what does happen is the freshman class, and there'll be another class, or we'll just say like last year, class of 24, right? So that class, right, this is in the House anyway, I guess it works in the Senate too. So, okay, right. So we have to choose our leaders, like for, because we're only here for 8 years. And so, we know the next leaders in the House and Senate for the next 8 years or something like that, 6 years, something like that, right? Which is kind of, I've always thought that's kind of weird. Because, and was it Chris Dorwith? There was one time when somebody didn't win the election, okay? That person who's your leader in 6 years, are they going to win their election? I mean, probably in safe districts, but nevertheless. So I would agree with you on that totally.
Go to 12 years.
Yeah.
Allow your speakers, or at least allow your Senate leadership and your speakers to have a longer terms as Speaker and Senate President.
Yeah.
This will create really a balance between us and the governor, because the governor can just wait you out, right? He's like, hey, you're going to be there 2 years. I'll be there.
We'll be asking about House Speaker Daniel Perez, because it seems like one of the things that he's impressed upon me is that I only have 2 years here, and I'm going to make a difference. Maybe it's not going to be a good difference for the state.
I think what he did is reestablish control, that the House is a co-equal branch of government, and that the legislature matters. I think for the governor's first 6 years, think about this. He had his honeymoon phase the first couple of years, and then he rolls right into, I'm a presidential candidate. And had Trump not won, DeSantis was
leading the polls. People forget that.
Right, likely to be the Republican nominee for president of the United States. So there was a lot of people in the legislature who saw that and were like, listen, we're just here to support him.
Right. Yeah.
But now we're in the sunset phase of the DeSantis administration. And, his senior leadership team has all left and taken other positions. So he's kind of left with the junior varsity squad, and he's kind of the coach of the junior varsity squad now, running this different state agencies and different pieces of government. And for the most part, I think that's where the struggle comes in. No, but, it's really hard to attract talent when your governor's only going to be there for, another 18, 20 months now, and bring them in. So you're about to see what happened, frankly, in a lot of governors' administration, where all the agencies' heads' first names is interim. And everybody's interim. There's no permanency, and nobody's empowered to make a decision. And that's a challenge for the state. But it's a weird time. We have to go through these. Every government goes through these. The Democratic administration went through these too.
Again, we've got about 11 minutes here, 49 minutes after the hour here. You're listening to The Skinny here from the WNF studios. I'm Mitch Perry with Ray Roa, speaking to former legislator Jeff Brandes about his time and commenting really what's going on right now in Tallahassee. Speaking of DeSantis, Hope Florida. I want to continue to remind people about this, because there is theoretically a investigation going on in the North Florida district of Jack Campbell, the state attorney up there. And there seems to be, Senator Brandes, so many things that we just don't know about Hope Florida. I know that the governor, when he goes out and talks about this, which he hasn't in the last couple of weeks, but for a while there, he continued to every time he went out, was that it's saved $100 million and 33,000 people, I believe, who have been saved by this program. And yet there's no real evidence. It may be that, but there's no hard evidence that we can find that. Forget about the scandal part of this. Just like, what has it done? Because the story came up, basically, I don't want to, when we talked to Lawrence Maurer and Alexandra Glorioso about how they dug into the story about Hope Florida, but I know that there was a bill in the legislature this year that was basically going to put it in the executive office of the governor's office, and that's where you had to get some information. And in the House analysis, it basically said said there was no, no tax reforms that were filed for this. It was a blaring red light at that moment that they weren't following the rules. And so it's really kind of blown up on them, and potentially if there was ever going to be a Casey DeSantis governorship candidacy. But do you think on the surface of what you've learned about Hope Florida that there's some serious malfeasance going on here?
I think they have problems all over Florida. I think, listen, I have a nonprofit. I have one person on staff, and we file our paperwork on time. They had many people on staff, and they couldn't file their paperwork. And frankly, I think nobody really knew what Hope Florida was doing, and really had, and taking political dollars and putting them into campaigns is kind of not what nonprofits should be doing, right? Like, especially spending those types of dollars. So I think they've got all kinds of issues. I think they were paying fast and loose with nonprofit rules, and I think the feds are going to stop or going to crank down on that.
We'll be watching that. We've got Kathy calling in here. By the way, you can still do that as well. 813-239-9663 is the phone number. Kathy from Hudson, you're on the Skinny.
Yeah, hi. I've lived in Florida since 1973 and grew up here. I've seen a lot of changes. I live in Pasco County. Where is our impact money going to? I live on the west side of Pasco County. It's all going to the east side. Wilton Simpson is promoting everything on the east side. And then you have another problem here in Florida. Builders want to make money. The whole business of home ownership is geared towards profit. So the idea of affordable housing is contradictory to making a profit in the business. It's all corporatized. The real estate industry is corporate. There's no real grassroots going on anywhere. I lived in a $30,000 house for many years and was happy there. I blame the politicians, Semler Corporation and Publix. Why is it they always know where to build a shopping center? And then you have number one Chinese restaurant moving into that strip center. You got the nail salon moving in. These people are investing a lot of money from China, Vietnam, and so forth, and buying up these strip malls. Not buying them, but renting them. The whole thing is corrupt.
Okay,
Thanks for the call, Kathy.
Kathy, before we go, let's go to Julie, who wants to call in and talk about David Jolly. Hello, Julie.
Hey, I just wanted to call in regards to David Jolly and the comment that was made that David Jolly is just another Charlie Crist. I beg to disagree on that due to the fact that he was a Republican. He wasn't an independent. He didn't keep running like Charlie Crist did. And I think it's just going to be another Republican talking point. So we're just going to nip that in the bud right now. That's all I want to say.
He did kind of keep running.
So, Julie, and you're an enthusiastic backer of Jolly?
I'm leaning towards him. And about 2 months ago, Piso was number one, and Jolly was 7 percentage points. So.
David's a friend of mine too. Like listen, I would say these things in front of David just as I would say them in front of my buddy Jason Pizzo. Like I have, I'm a little bit unfiltered, as you could tell here, and so I tend to speak my mind, and I've been a friend of Charlie Crist too. I've seen these politicians evolve, and part of it is to stay relevant. I've evolved to stay relevant, right? Like I'm not going to disagree with that. I run a nonprofit. Why? That's an evolution to stay relevant and do what I love. I think these people are doing what they love, and they're trying to figure out what lane they can get into to continue to do what they love. And I don't blame them for that.
Yeah.
Well, one thing I'd rather have David Jolly than Danielson that's coming up, the congressman from Fort Myers. I think he's got a real good shot if it ends up just being those two. I doubt it will, but, I'm a Democrat. I'm leaning towards Jolly for sure. I wasn't before, but I've met him now a few times, and he might be the right guy for the right time, and I sure hope so.
Thank you, Joey. Speaking about Donalds, you mentioned Byron Donalds. I am of the mind, Jeff Brand, is that there will definitely be another Republican challenger of some merit. Merit's not the right term, but somebody of some, heft, but, not a minor candidate. Whether that be Casey DeSantis, which doesn't seem like it would be at this point, maybe be Jay Collins. What do you think? Do you think there'll be a challenge? I mean, it's obviously this is a Trump-endorsed candidate in Byron Donalds, so that would be very formidable for a Republican, but
Look, I think it will be interesting to see what the fundraising numbers look like here in the next couple of months, because that will really tell you what's going on.
And Donald's doing very well fundraising.
He's doing very well, and I think at some juncture, as he continues to build that war chest up, and with the Trump endorsement, what you end up getting is a place where there's just not a pathway in a shorter period of time.
Right.
And I don't think Jay Collins is going to get there. I don't think Casey DeSantis actually is going to get into this race. She may, but I think that what you've seen was Trump endorsed because it kept Casey out. Right, because it kneecapped her fundraising, because the Trump endorsed candidate is out here right now. So I think DeSantis is trying to build some money up in his war chest so that he can kind of add Casey's name onto that, and then they can kind of have this war chest together. That's how I planned it out. But I think if you see 4 or 5 candidates get in, I think actually Matt Gaetz gets in and trying to get a 20%, kind of 25% of the vote there. So I think the crowded field, I think Byron with the Trump endorsement is going to do just fine, and he would be the first black governor of the state of Florida, and I think he would build an incredible team, and we would move forward. I think we would have a very strong state and a governor.
I want to, before we go, we haven't talked about one of your lanes that you focus on, which is criminal justice reform. Again, not in this legislative session, I certainly didn't see too much coming out of that. The KPMG report that we all know that came out, I guess, fall of 2023, that was really, it showed us how we need so much money spent on our prisons, that the state, they kind of did something last year, recurring money, is that right? That like $100 million a year, is that's still going on, right?
It is and it isn't, right? They've reduced the amount of funds now. And so, listen, there is no plan in Florida for its prison system. One of the things I've called for is a commission on the prison system to look at, overall and come up with a long-term plan. But in my estimation, the legislature in the entire 120 days of 60 days of session and committee weeks spent about 4 or 5 hours in total on the prison system, which is the largest state agency that we have.
Yeah.
The legislature is ill-designed to take on the issues of the prison system without creating a commission to do that. And until that happens, there will be no long-term plan, or until something terrible happens at a prison and that forces the conversation, or the courts take over. Right. What we've seen in other states is ultimately the courts will, they'll get involved at some juncture. There's a case right now in Florida where Florida has argued that 100-degree temperature is not cruel enough to be considered cruel and unusual punishment. So we're determining what temperature is cruel enough to be considered cruel and unusual punishment, because 50% of Florida's facilities, sometimes 60%, are not air conditioned.
70, I thought.
Yeah, I think it's higher. So I think we've got real challenges in the state of Florida. Most of these facilities are 50, 60 years old. They're ill-designed. They're falling apart. We can't hire staff. And that's why when we talk about the, Alligator Alcatraz, nobody knows where the staffing's come from. 60% of our corrections officers will quit within the first year.
That's what I was wondering at the top of the show. Where is it going to come from? Geo's going to send people?
No, I think you're going to get the National Guard back in there. I think you're going to have all kinds of issues.
The domestic Guantanamo situation.
I think you're going to have all kinds of issues with staffing. This is much more of a kind of a Japanese internment camp kind of problem than it's kind of like the Mexican internment camp or South American internment camp versus an Alcatraz situation.
When you bring this up, it's just glaring. We just heard about this a week ago. There's so much that hasn't been vetted or discussed. I know Senator Lori Berman, the Democratic leader, she just had a press conference this morning talking about that. Like, why couldn't this? Now, I don't know, timing-wise.
Well, I mean, the question is it going to be a state facility or is it going to be a federal facility?
Right.
If it's a state facility, legislators can walk in any day and night, and they'll be able to see that facility in hand, and you'll have plenty of visibility there.
Interesting, though, you say that because, in fact, the feds say they're going to pay for all of it. DeSantis says the feds are paying for it, and I think they're the ones who came to DeSantis and said,
but is it a federal facility, or is it a state state facility that is leased to the feds?
That's a great question, and
that's an important distinction.
Right, exactly. Okay, Senator, it's been great having you here.
We should have done a 2-hour show.
Well, I know. We did do a couple of interviews at the beginning there.
You can just stay. We'll tape the show for the 4th of July. Senator Jeff Brandes, thank you so much with the Florida Policy Institute.
My pleasure.
Now, a policy addict, self-professed. Thanks for coming back on the show. Thank you so much to our listeners today. Skip Sassy's on the boards for us, Joe Remo on the phones. Mitch, we want to remind people you're going to be listening to a tape show next week. We're going to tape it tomorrow.
Right.
We're going to hear a lot of stuff that we've kind of had over the last 3 years of this program.
Roughly, yeah. We'll go back to 2023 on some of the stuff.
And we're going to light off fireworks in the studio.
Yeah, it'll be fun. If you're enjoying your 4th of July, tune us in. You'll be hearing some kind of fresh, kind of dated programming, but there will be something on here this time.
That's right. So thank you so much for listening to WMNF Tampa. I do believe I saw Joel and Shilke in Studio One, ready with Art in your ear. Have a great weekend. Have a great holiday. Just be nice to each other. That'd be good.